Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today is Sunday, so we are doing breaches of the week, and strap yourselves in. This one is going to be a marathon. Now, before I begin, I'd like to thank the following people that tagged me, linked me, messaged me, whatever it was, to get me a lot of these breaches. It is always, always appreciated, and that would be David Walker, Jason Dance, Jacqueline Wolf, Barrett Peterson, Dr. Christopher Gay, and Chris Fallon. Guys, thank you so much, and with that, let's dive right in, because we have no time to waste. And we're going to be starting with payroll giant Prism HR. They suffered a cyber attack last Sunday, and according to their clients, Prism HR has told them that they suffered a quote-unquote suspicious activity over the weekend, and then immediately shut down their network to protect the quote integrity of their systems. It's most likely ransomware. We'll see how that unfolds, but heads up, Prism HR customers and employees. Moving on, let's do a quick Accellion update. They are actually engaging a law firm now to start combating the class actions that are coming down the pipe for them. But cybersecurity firm Qualys this week disclosed that they too are caught up in the Accellion data breach. That's obviously going to be a huge thing. They are in the running for worst breach of 2021, but they have a competitor this week, and we will get to that. Moving on. Let's talk about a company called SendGrid. They do cloud-based email delivery. And so basically a phishing campaign targeting users of Outlook Web Access and Office 365 services collected thousands of credentials relying on trusted domains like SendGrid. Now, the threat actor behind this activity, which received the name Compact, has been operating since at least the beginning of 2020 and has likely collected over 400,000 credentials in multiple phishing campaigns. Now, they're using Zoom invites as a lure and an extensive list of email addresses. Basically, the operators of the phishing campaign deliver messages from hacked accounts on the SendGrid cloud-based email delivery platform. And because SendGrid is a trusted provider of email, the messages have a greater chance to reach their destination and not be blocked by email protection technologies such as spam filters. So if you're getting Zoom invites, make sure they are legitimate. Make sure the links are legitimate as well. Heads up to you. Moving on, let's talk about the Mazda Cybercrime Forum. Now, Mazda, also known as Mazafuka, is one of the oldest cybercrime forums where basically the community has to vote on new members before they are granted access. Now, according to Bleeping Computer, they were contacted by a newly registered Twitter user who stated that Mazda had been hacked and their member data was leaked. Basically, this is a crime forum, so they're leaking members of basically criminal hackers, probably researchers, as well, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the leaked data consists approximately of 2,982 user records and contains member user IDs, usernames, email addresses, redacted passwords, certificate file names, certificate passwords, and members' contact information on ICQ, AIM, Yahoo, MSN, and Skype. So I think that's going to be rather interesting. Obviously, they go back a ways if you're looking at AOL Instant Messenger being on that list, but that's going to be a boon, I think, for the intelligence community. Moving on. Let's talk about 3 VPNs, and if you're running one of these, you probably should stop and switch. We're talking about Super VPN, Gecko VPN, and Chat VPN. And the reason why you should move is because detailed credentials for more than 21 million VPN app users were stolen and advertised for sale on the dark web last week, offered by a cyber criminal who allegedly stole the data collected by these apps themselves. Now, the data includes email addresses, randomly generated password strings, payment information, and device IDs belonging to the users of Super VPN, Gecko VPN, and Chat VPN. And if you're using them, it's time to switch. Moving on. Let's talk about the Center for Early Education. This is a quote-unquote elite Hollywood private school where essentially major talent agents and also actors and actresses send their children. Their servers have been breached apparently in a couple of weeks, and law enforcement is investigating. One or more attackers have published staff payroll documentation and email blasts that were riddled with racist, sexist, and homophobic language. Now, the intruders' messages, in some cases framed as party invites, and featuring in at least one instance as a seeming lure the name of a very prominent parent in the subject line, were sent to children as well as their proxy contacts, including family members and other care providers. This is presumably drawn from the students' internal school profiles. One noted featured rhetoric suggested that white teachers should receive pay raises, so you know what they were doing and what they were going after. And like I said, this is high-profile Hollywood actors and talent agents, so we may see a whole bunch of disclosures thanks to their children getting breached of A-list actors. We'll see. Moving on, let's talk about a company called Lactalis. They are the world's leading dairy group with 85,000 employees in 51 countries. They disclosed a cyber attack after an unknown threat actor breached some of the company's systems. Now, in a press release on Friday, Lactalis said that only a limited number of computers on its network were compromised during this attack and added that there was no data to report in this breach, although the investigation is ongoing. I obviously will keep you up to date if that changes. Moving on, let's talk about Ally Align Health in the state of Virginia. Another unauthorized third party gained access to the computer network and planted ransomware last year, and it's now just coming to light. 33,932 current and former patients were affected. Social security numbers, names, addresses, and medical history, among other information, may have been stolen. So heads up to you if you use Ally Align Health in Virginia. Moving on, let's talk about a United States-based managed service IT provider called Acucon. Now, they're a wholly owned subsidiary of the ODP Corporation, which basically owns Office Depot and Office Max, and they have about 8,000 people employed. Now, some past and existing customers of Acucon include well-known names such as Home Depot, Target, Citibank, Wells Fargo, Trust Bank, and Lowe's. So obviously, these guys are going to be a big deal if they're breached, but according to Bleeping Computer, they were told that Acucon began contacting customers to alert them that they had been compromised by malware soon after the attack. However, customers were not told what the type of attack, what it was, what occurred, was it ransomware? They basically weren't saying this. Now, multiple people also told Bleeping Computer that this was a ransomware attack, but they could not confirm that independently. After reaching out to Acucon, the company basically issued a statement to Bleeping Computer saying that they had suffered a malware incident and that no evidence of it is spreading into customer systems. We'll see where that goes, but heads up if you use Acucon basically out of Office Depot and Office Max. Moving on, let's talk about an app called ZFive. This is an on-demand internet streaming service based in India, and they may have suffered another data breach. I went back and I did talk about these guys months ago. This time, this is reportedly putting 9 million users' private data at risk of being exploited by attackers. Now, previous ZFive data leaks were reported last year, as I mentioned, and what sparked this new episode, interestingly enough, was a tweet a few days ago from an independent internet security researcher who wrote the following, and I quote, 9 million users alleged data leak from ZFive again. It seems latest data leak on 23rd February 2021. I'm sure no one is going to take responsibility for this too. Now we can say there is no value of our personal and financial data. Risk is ours. Obviously, ZFive was not a fan of this, and they responded on Twitter, though that tweet had apparently been deleted, and I quote, our viewers' privacy is our top priority and will surely look into it. Kindly avoid posting such details on a public forum. Please consider deleting the same and send us a direct message with all the details. We'll look into the issue. So obviously, here we are. ZFive may be going through another data breach, and I will obviously keep everybody up to date on that. It is very popular in many countries around the world, especially India, although the United States does not have that service. Moving on, let's talk about Allergy Partners, a medical outfit obviously in North Carolina. They got hit with ransomware on February 23rd, and that continued for apparently 8 days as the attackers attempted to ransom them for $1.75 million, according to a report filed with the Asheville Police Department in North Carolina. And to quote an interview from them, their spokesperson, they would probably have address, phone number, social security number, any previous issues you had, or something unrelated to the allergy necessarily. So apparently not a formal disclosure yet, even though the world knows in terms of quantification. So heads up if you use Allergy Partners in North Carolina. Moving on, let's talk about the city of Kingman in Arizona. Now, they had a cyber attack apparently late last week, 2 weeks ago actually, that kept the city computer system shut down for days, and officials don't know when it'll be fully working again. They're obviously in that process of restoring, but the cyber attack meant that residents couldn't pay their utility bills online, and the city could only process payments in person or over the phone, and the city said they are waiving late fees for utility bills, because obviously if you can't get to the site to pay your bill, you ain't late. So there you go, heads up, residents of city of Kingman, Arizona. Moving on, let's talk about the data analytics agency Pollcat. They had an unsecured server basically that belonged to them that exposed an estimated 30 terabytes of business records online, resulting essentially in the firm being held for ransom. Now, apparently on October 29th of last year, a research team discovered that an Elasticsearch server owned by them was exposing these 30 terabytes, and essentially anybody without authentication could essentially go in and look. And they found records dating back to 2007, including employee usernames and hashed passwords, over 6.5 billion tweets, social media records, and over 1 billion posts gathered from different blogs and websites, etc., etc. Now, the public information gathered by Pollcat is harvested on a daily basis and tends to relate on subjects such as COVID-19, firearms, politicians, racism, and healthcare. They were notified, but in that gap between notifying and actually remediating, they got hit. So we'll see what happens there with Pollcat, but odds are if you have a social media account and it's public, they're probably scraping it. Moving on. Let's talk about the Rehoboth McKinley Christian Healthcare Service in Gallup, New Mexico. They got hit with a cyber attack earlier this year. Now, publicly available details about this attack are kind of scarce at the moment, and the hospital has been declining to comment beyond confirming that they actually had this problem and it took their computer systems offline. But sensitive employee files posted online by a hacker group known for ransomware attacks actually happened. Now, this group that breached Rehoboth, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, stole sensitive employee files such as job applications and background check authorizations that included social security numbers and posted them to their leak site in an apparent attempt to extort the hospital into payment. So heads up if you use the Rehoboth McKinley Christian Healthcare Services in Gallup, New Mexico. Moving on, let's talk about the government of West Bengal in India. A security flaw on a website run by the government of West Bengal exposed lab results for at least hundreds of thousands of residents, maybe even likely millions, who took a COVID-19 test. Now, the website is part of the West Bengal's government, their mass coronavirus testing program. Once a COVID-19 test result is ready, the government sends a text message to the patient with a link to that website that contains the results. But a security researcher found that the link containing the patient's unique identification number was scrambled with what's known as base 64 encoding or hashing, which is very easy to crack. Now, because this identification number was also incrementally sequenced, basically this meant that the website, essentially anybody could change that number up by 1 and view other patients' test results. Now, the test results contain patient's name, sex, age, postal address, and if the patient's lab results came back positive, negative, or inconclusive. So if you took a COVID-19 test and you're under the government of West Bengal in India, you got exposed. Moving on. Let's give you an update on the AFTS, or Automatic Funds Transfer Service. This is another supply chain breach coming out of the state of Washington, and obviously they're getting a lot of businesses and governments in that area hit, and so the one disclosing this week is out of the state of Washington, and that is the Skagit Public Utility District. So heads up, if you live in the Skagit Public Utility District, your data might have been breached along with a whole bunch of other counties, cities in Washington, California, and all along the West Coast. Moving on, let's talk about Cody Vitti. They are a medical records contractor. One of their employees had access to data and shared information with individuals for training purposes, but this was not authorized by their massive client Humana, which is one of the largest insurance providers in the United States. This happened between the dates of October 12th of 2020 and December 16th of 2020, and Humana was informed on the 22nd of December of last year, and so Humana is notifying approximately 65,000 health plan members that their personal information may have been exposed. And we are talking names, dates of birth, social security numbers, partial or full, address, phone number, email address, insurance identification numbers, provider name, date of service, medical record numbers, treatment information, and imagery such as x-rays, photographs, etc. So if you have Humana, you may want to check in. Moving on, let's talk about Benefit Recovery Specialists, Inc., or BRSI, out of Houston, Texas. They are basically have a massive client that is disclosing that they got hit because of BRSI, and that would be Medicaid for Texas or Texas Medicaid. Now, BRSI was terminated after this data breach caused by a ransomware attack from Russia last year exposed the personal information of tens of thousands of low-income residents in Texas on Medicaid. Now, Christine Mann confirmed that the State Health and Human Services Commission, which runs Medicaid, did not learn that 98.5% of the nearly 275,000 Americans potentially affected by this breach were basically Texas Medicaid patients until it received questions about the incident from the Dallas Morning News. Now, I find that to be absolutely interesting in all of that. They obviously went through really bad power outages right now. Now there's going to be 275,000 Texans that are also suffering a data breach. Sorry, guys, not fun. Moving on. Let's head on over to the Netherlands and talk about Ticket Counter. This is a Dutch e-ticketing platform. They suffered a data breach after a user database containing 1.9 million unique email addresses was stolen from an unsecured staging server. Now, the data exposed could be full names, email addresses, phone numbers, IP addresses, and hashed passwords. So if you've used Ticket Counter out of the Netherlands and they basically contract with zoos and other venues like that for you to get your tickets, heads up to you. Moving on, let's talk about email platform verification.io. They suffered a major breach that compromised about 2 billion records, 2 billion with a B. Now, personal email addresses and names were exposed. Business intelligence data is believed to have been caught up in the compromised details as well, along with information on employees and revenue data from other firms. I'm going to be watching this one because this one could be another disaster and in the running for worst of the year, but this isn't the one I was actually talking about before. Moving on, let's talk about the Williams Formula One racing team. That's right, this is an F1 car. They basically had a March 5th launch, or rather they were planning a March 5th launch for the 2021 Williams Racing Formula One team car known as the FW43B, and that was disrupted by a major, apparently a malicious cyber attack and a data leak. I don't know much more about it at this moment. This is brand new. I am tracking this one, so all you F1 car fans out there, if you are looking or interested in seeing the FW43B, you're going to have to wait a while. Williams Formula One obviously is cleaning that up. And finally, and we've got a couple finalies for you today, and this one I think may actually eclipse Excellion, and wow, when you get a hold of this one. We are talking about a communications and IT vendor for 90% of the entire world's airlines. Now, this is SITA or SITA, like that's what I'm calling them. They got breached, compromising passenger data, that's right, your data and my data, stored on the company's US servers in what the company is calling a quote-unquote highly sophisticated attack. Now, the affected servers are in Atlanta, Georgia, and they belong to the SITA Passenger Service System, or PSS. Now, by virtue of this, or basically virtue of this hit, airlines are now disclosing incident, and it looks like this may have taken place over several years because some disclosures are getting very specific, and for that, I will go to Malaysia Airlines. You might remember them from Flight 370 that disappeared like 5-10 years ago. Now, Malaysia Airlines has suffered, obviously, this data breach, but they are claiming that it spanned 9 years, exposing the personal information from members of its Enrich Frequent Flyer program. And so starting March 1st, Malaysia Airlines began emailing their members of the Enrich Rewards program to disclose that they were affected. They are disclosing member names, date of birth, gender, contact details, frequent flyer numbers, flyer statuses, and tier level in the system. Obviously, you don't start at elite, you start at the base and you move your way up as you fly. They're saying no stolen info, what wasn't stolen was info on itineraries, reservations, ticketing, IDs, or credit card or payment card information. And so that is a fairly consistent thing I'm seeing along them. So I'm not going to read every breach disclosure, but Singapore Airlines also had the same details basically as Malaysia Air. They have 580,000 of their members affected by that. I did not have a number for Malaysia Air. In the United States, this past Friday, a couple days ago, both United and American Airlines both started emailing customers on Friday afternoon. So if you are a United Rewards member or an American Rewards member, you should be getting probably an email saying, hey, it's not us, it's SITA or SITA. Also in New Zealand, Air New Zealand disclosed as well. And again, we are talking about 90% of the world's airlines, which means you have a 9 in 10 chance every time you get onto a plane that airline carrier is using this company. And if you are a frequent traveler or you've signed up for the rewards thing, even if you're flying once every 3 years, heads up to you, your data has been compromised in this breach. This may be, and I'm never optimistic with these, this may be the worst breach of 2021. Excellion might be breathing a sigh of relief to be in number 2, and we will see, because we are in March. We've got months to go. And finally, and this is another one, actually, I think that's in the running that might knock these two out of the way. We are talking about over 30,000 Microsoft Exchange email servers worldwide. That's right. If your company has a Microsoft email server basically sitting in your office or your data center or your infrastructure somewhere, heads up to you. This is a massive problem. Now, 4 exploits found in Microsoft Exchange Server software have reportedly led to over 30,000 both commercial organizations and U.S. governmental organizations having their email hacked, and this is according to a report by Krebs on Security. Now, another publisher, Wired, is also reporting tens of thousands of email servers hit. The exploits have been patched by Microsoft, but basically, the detection and cleanup of this process is going to be the cleanup process for this infection is going to be a massive effort for thousands of state and city governments, fire and police departments, school districts, financial institutions, and other organizations, not to mention private corporations as well. Now, according to Microsoft, the vulnerabilities allowed the attackers to gain access to email accounts and also gave them the ability to install malware that might let them back into those servers at a later time. They got into these email servers in a very deep manner. Now, both Krebs and Wired reported that while the attack was carried out by Hafnium, which is known as they're basically a Chinese cutout hacking group, Microsoft hasn't spoken to the scale of the attack yet. It also points to the same group as having exploited vulnerabilities, saying that it has a high confidence that this group is indeed state-sponsored. So that is looking like a state-sponsored cyber attack, basically propped up by the Chinese government, hitting tens of thousands of servers, mostly in the United States, but also worldwide. Also, according to Krebs on Security, the attack has been ongoing since at least January 6th, the day of the Capitol riot, if you remember, but it actually ramped up in late February. Microsoft released all of its updates and patches on March 2nd to fix these problems, which means that the attackers had almost 2 months to carry out all of these operations. The president of the cybersecurity firm Velocity, which discovered this attack, told Brian Krebs, and I quote, "If you're running Exchange and you haven't patched this yet, there's a very high chance that your organization is already compromised." Both the White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and former director of the CISA, Chris Krebs, basically no relation to Krebs on Security. For those of you who are wondering, Brian Krebs and Chris Krebs are not related. They've also obviously talking about this as well. This is a huge problem, because this is basically comparable to the SolarWinds attack out of Russia. The United States is the single largest target basically on the planet for cyber attacks. And so as we are monitoring and looking at threat, essentially, if you're sitting in the United States, you need to maintain vigilance. You cannot simply have a server sitting in the corner collecting and sending your email as you access it. You have to maintain vigilance. You have to keep updated. You have to make sure you've got good threat detection systems in place that are going to look for anything malicious. Also, it's a really good thing to geo-lock your firewalls as well. So in other words, if you're a small business that does no business outside of the United States, there's no reason why anybody from a foreign country should actually be looking at the public side of your infrastructure. So lock it down to only allow US-based addresses to actually look at it. There's a lot of things that you can do here to do this, but update your Microsoft Exchange systems. This is a huge, huge problem. And if you're an IT professional that is watching me or listening to this, make sure that you are checking all of your customers, because if they are basically, if they have an Exchange server, that means they're probably exposing Outlook web access through that firewall in their office, which means they're possibly getting hit. And basically, this is what they're looking for. So make sure that you are checking absolutely anything and everything there. This is a huge one. And again, this week, we have 2 major contenders for worst breaches of the week, or worst breaches of the year, worst breaches of 2021. Like I said, this week was a marathon, and that is your news of the day. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, and please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe and stay online. Thanks, everyone.